Our second speaker today is the Honourable Dr. David Gillespie MP, Federal Minister for Lyne in New South Wales. Dr. Gillespie has held a number of parliamentary positions, ministerial appointments, and served on a number of committees since being elected to Parliament in 2013. He has had significant nuclear engagement and is the chair and founding organiser of the Australian Parliamentary Friends of Nuclear Industries. He regularly advises corporate and government leaders on developments in nuclear energy and nuclear medicine, and is a passionate contributor to public discussion on the benefits of nuclear energy generation for Australia and Asia Pacific. Today, David will present details of meetings held with the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission and also the Ontario Energy Minister, and perhaps some other things as well. We'll see. All yours, David. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. I'll just get my presentation up. Okay, well, teaming with Canada, that's the topic tonight. As you know, the 4 nuclear musketeers headed off to the big smoke. It's more than a Kon-Tiki tour. There was much less alcohol and a lot more science. But why Canada and why America? Well, Canada in particular, I did a term of university over there. I was very interested in science. Well, that's why I ended up in medicine. But I was aware of Canada's capability. But because of my growing interest in nuclear to solve the energy conundrum in Australia in the climate change scenario, I figured I'd dig more, and it's actually amazing. They started their nuclear program when Churchill moved the whole British nuclear research labs and people to Chalk River in the middle of World War II when he thought Hitler was going to invade. And they have gone ahead leaps and bounds ever since. And they are 100% nuclear capable, and we're aspirants, but we're only 75% there. But we're not like the Arab Emirates, who started from 0 and sandhills, and they've got 3 big reactors and a 4th on the way in the time span that I've been in Parliament. So anyone who says it's going to take us 20 or 30 years is absolute balderdash. Look, we are, as I said, we're already a 0.75 full-time equivalent nuclear nation. We've got all this architecture, we've got all these scientists, we've got all this training and long history of involvement since the 50s. We've run 3 research and training reactors at Lucas Heights, which is now in the middle of suburbia. And one of my good friends' sister just sold a house across the road for $3.2 million. Yet people are having nervous Nelly attacks over putting low-level waste in the middle of the South Australian desert, underground. So go figure that. We have a lot of expertise. We're internationally recognised. Our bodies, PANZA in particular, that I used to be the minister responsible for that, is connected with all the big international energy agency committees. And we're well known as a great researcher and particularly medical isotope producer. 27% of the world's medical isotopes came out of Lucas Heights. All the microchips in semiconductors all got irradiated at Lucas Heights up until the last couple of years. Now, how do we make up where our paths diverged from Canada? In the 1950s, they kept going and started partnering with GE, building nuclear power plants. Then they went on to build their generic CANDU reactor suite, which has been deployed around the world, as well as in Canada. But we just got frozen in time. But how do we change it? And the moral of the story is you can't do it alone. The argument itself to all of us makes eminent sense, but there's a lot of people out there whose view of nuclear is based on what they saw in the Bart Simpson's view, and scary pseudo-documentaries with dark lighting and scary music and whispered tones of impending doom, like Netflix. So you've got to explain to people the renewables that many of Australia are in love with can't do it all, and they need something that's clean and low carbon to save them. We're saving renewables for future generations. If you can save anything for a future generation, everyone loves you. But I'm just trying to point out we've got to use language that means something to young people and middle-aged people who have all these legacy fears and myths about nuclear. We've also got to embrace talking to people about the real things that happened. Like Fukushima, no one got killed. They were all killed by the tidal wave and all the destruction it wrought. 3 Mile Island, again, no one got irradiated or killed. But if you saw Netflix, you'd think the place was just about to go off like a firecracker. If the other thing that people are embedded in is waste, you've got to talk about it differently. It's spent nuclear fuel, or as Rob Parker is trying to change the taxonomy, it's first pass fuel. We recycle everything. ScoMo and us in Coalition, we banned the export of our plastic waste and our glass. We're recycling everything. Well, we can recycle nuclear waste if we got our act together. So they're all the really good things that we could do. Dave Collins has just alluded to most of those, but the main thing is when you talk to people in my electorate that worked in a coal mine or in a power station and you tell them that we're transitioning, that means they're going from $150,000 a year working in a power plant to $40,000 a year installing solar panels. Transition is an ugly word out there in the real world. They have connected the dots. They want to have high-paying jobs, and 95% of the people in power stations that are fired by coal can work in a nuclear plant. It's just the high-tech operators and engineering, nuclear engineers that are the small number. So Canada, they have an enormous capability. They have a huge supply chain. They have a 17 billion Canadian each year business. That's bigger than the business of every university in Australia, who is one of our big export earners. But they're vertically integrated from the mining, the processing, to energy delivery, and 76,000 jobs and 17 billion every year comes out of it. The centre of it is in Ontario, and Ontario Power Generation is a huge power utility, world scale and North America scale. They have been at the cutting edge of energy production since they started with run-of-river turbines for hydroelectricity at Niagara Falls. And they have a 100-year history, but they've been involved in nukes ever since. The other attraction of going to Canada is they speak English, you know, they're bilingual too in some parts, but their governance, which is part of the way we all get it accepted here, is that they're like us. They speak English, they have the Queen, they have all that British background, they have a parliament, they call it the House of Commons and the upper house, but our Senate and Reps is more of a Westminster, but they're more of a Westminster. They, like us, they don't like to be called Americans, but they are they think big like Americans, and they don't muck around, otherwise they freeze and die in the middle of winter. But all their regulatory bodies, they're a mirror image of ours. They've just got a different title, and they have the health ministry involved in some of the safety, and then they have the resources department in charge of other stuff. They never went into nuclear weapons or nuclear subs. They did flirt with subs, but then the Berlin Wall fell down and peace was going to reign forevermore. They never went there, but they could so easily have done it. They've got the same paradigm as us. They have a federal oversight of regulation, but the provinces actually act like our states used to when they were self-governing entities. Remember when New South Wales built dams and highways and power stations and all sorts of things without going cap in hand to the government? Before they sold off all those technocrats into private industry, we used to do stuff. They still do that. Ontario Power Generation, which I'll come to, is huge, and it's a government entity. Now, what Ontario worked out is what we're in the middle of finding out the painful way. Back in 2008 and 9, they brought in the Green Energy Act, and all those things up there, all those things that I hope you can see up there, you know, the feed-in tariffs, the absolute right, anyone who built a wind farm or a solar farm could connect to the grid. You got paid whether if you generate the energy, you got paid for it, as was explained to us, even if it couldn't get onto the grid. So it was money for jam. It was going to deliver 50,000 jobs. It was going to do all these things. It was going to empower remote communities. New industries were going to spring up. But a lot of people didn't like the fact that anyone who was building a renewable power farm could just turn up and do it, and the local government couldn't control it. And a new member of parliament called Todd Smith from the Progressive Conservative Party, which I think is sort of like the National Party, stroke Liberal Party ilk, but more like the Country Party. They're very nuts and bolts people. He put in a private members bill back in 2013 to give the power back to local government so that they could assess whether an unused but very expensive wind farm or solar farm had to go through the local planning. Eventually he got his chance, and in 2018, when the then government lost power because the energy bills were going through the roof, a lot of the manufacturing, car industry was leaving or had left Canada because their energy was so expensive, and people weren't being empowered. There wasn't a jobs boom. They repealed the Act, and they gave the power back to local government, and they've just been returned in another general election. And there's the three of the four musketeers, and that's Todd on the right, and you'll see him featuring a bit. He's a great salesman, but his take-home message to us was that we can't, they worked out, they transitioned, but they had a viable plan. They realised renewables are still there. All the contracts are still being honoured, but they're being honoured by the state. It's not going on people's electricity bill. It's about 900 million Canadian a year honouring these contracts that they signed up to, but they didn't want electricity users to pay that, and they decided to start a small modular reactor roadmap because they are at the cutting edge of everything. They also decided to refurb most of their can-do fleet and give it another 30 years. It's a $12 billion project, and they're ahead of time and under cost because they're getting better at it because they're doing the whole lot at once. The governor at the time, not Todd, said to OPG and also the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, the regulators, decided we can't approve and investigate everyone. We've just got to choose one and go with it. So they chose one, but then they said, well, maybe we should have a smaller one. So they chose two, and then they said, well, what about a micro? What about up in the Northwest Territories? We've got to have a really small one. So they looked at all the available, there's about 40 or 50 designs floating around the world. They went with three. And we met with the regulators because we have got to have great regulators in this country. So why not learn from them? Because they've done all the work. They've been on this roadmap for 5 years, sorting the wheat from the chaff. They've done all the heavy lifting. We just need to become best friends forever with the Canadian regulators. When you flew on a 737 or an A380, no one in Australia approved it. It just turned up here and worked. And fortunately, none of them have crashed. And all the regulators around the world are saying, hang on, the UK's regulating them, then the Europeans regulate them, and then the Canadians regulate them, and the Americans regulate them. But they're all the same plants. Why don't we get our act together and make it like jet planes? And if this is approved to operate, it's a good design. But we need Australians over there now, sitting in the same building, going through it, because Bob's your uncle. If we get out of the quicksand and we do go ahead with nuclear power, or I should say when, it's going to happen. It's just whether we have a disaster and then we do it, or we do it in a sensible way. They'll say, oh, but we've got to check it. But we've never done any of this stuff. So why not just get a team going, whack them over there in Ottawa, employ them from here, they're sitting there, over the next 2 years. And we've got our regulatory approval done and dusted, being taught how to do it. So we met with these guys, and now these are the actual people. They're not the board of the commission. These are just the senior technical guys. And their philosophy is they said, we don't favour any technology over the other, we just favour good regulation. But around the world, they're known as the best regulators. They have a dedicated plan to regulate small modular reactors, a whole of life cycle. They've done all their research, and they don't regulate everything, but if they think it's a viable technology, they will put it. And I'll give you a list of all the ones they're looking at. They collaborate with everyone, all the important organisations, and this alignment of regulation is really something they're working on. They signed up with the US Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and GE, because of their long involvement since the 50s, giving plants and building them in Canada, they've taken their SMR through a vendor design review, which is sort of like a pre-DA approval, and they are hot to trot. They're ready to go, and hopefully we'll start building in about 20 months' time. They were putting in their final plans weeks after we left, and that process should be underway. But that harmonisation is the thing that they're really keen to do. The other thing that's similar to Australia, they've got all the First Nations tribes. In fact, now you see it in the lingo in Australia. We talk about Indigenous now as First Nations. Well, they have the same paradigm, unlike America, which I don't think the First Nations in America, they lost all the Indian wars, and they've just been, they're not in the same level as how Canada recognises or we recognise Indigenous. So that sensitivity, they're used to that. It wouldn't, and would so marry the paradigm we have here in Australia. So I could see that there would be good synchrony. All of that is pretty evident, but basically they've got the reputation because they are sensible and they don't muck around. They get the pre-DA process done, so they get a lot of the difficult things out of the way first. And then they check every bolt, every nut, every ounce of cement. They want to know everything, as Jacopo has identified. If you don't plan, the PPPP, prior preparation prevents piss poor outcomes. My brother was in the army, he taught me that. So basically you don't start like they did Vauxhall and Flamerville and all these other places with 10% of the design, we'll work it on as we go, and go back to the regulators every time you change the rough plan. No, you do all that and then you start building. And that's something that we could be the beneficiaries of it. This is the process. The moral of the story is they're agile. It looks at the whole construction. They do it as a joint process, and they have gateways that you have to go through so that if they see something wrong, they can pull it up at any time. And if we want a model of how to do it, copy them. The US has stagnated for so long. Death by regulation is a particularly good tactic in politics, and I think the left anti-nuclear sentiment actually manifested it in the quagmire of US regulation. So if you get through, everything's been checked for sure, but it's death by 1,000 cuts. We don't want to have that when we finally go nuclear. We want good regulation. To give you an idea of who's going where in Canada, they're all doing it, not just Ontario, New Brunswick and Saskatchewan. They're all in it together. This is after they've sifted through all the other applications, but they are also actively involved in regulating other things that are going to be deployed in America and elsewhere. I think I've told you about that, but we did visit this site here. We went out to Darlington and they took us round and showed where the geotechnical work out in the lake and here is being done for the first BWRX. That slide is just to demonstrate the complexity and the range of what is turning up on their doorstep, because everyone's worked out these are the good regulators. They try and help you. They're not seen as a barrier. So they've got a finger in all the pies, little, medium, big, pebble bed reactors, you know, the TerraPower thing. They're all making their way through Canada's regulatory system. Now, this is our nightmare. Look at that, Liddell. 1st of the 4th, 22. Like I said, we will end up with nuclear. It's just whether it's chaotic and rushed and everyone will be blaming everyone. But I suspect we'll have history repeat next year, shortly after these 3 units close. We will have a shortage. There's wafer-thin reserve capacity anywhere. Prices will go through the roof. We'll all get told that we have to turn everything off and just sit there in the hot or in the cold. And people like Tomago will be having nightmares, being told to turn all their pot lines off. So look, all of these sites, you're all familiar with them, they could all take, there wouldn't have to be any grid expansion. It'd all fit on site. They just have to go through the geotechnical, because the plant that we looked at in North Carolina is 30 to 40 metres underground. So a lot of our ones, say on the Central Coast, are just near waterways. I mean, I've put a lot of bores down on our farm and you find out that there's subterranean waterways in places you didn't think they are. So they've got to do, but assuming the sites of our coal plants, which are built on the surface, are dry underneath, they could whack one of those BWRXs or a new scale in there quite easily. Maybe size might be the other thing, but at least with the BWRX, it's much, much smaller than a big existing coal plant. Now, they are actively marketing, Canada and Ontario and Todd Smith. Not only are GE Hitachi doing deals, but all the people, the power utilities in Czechoslovakia, in Sweden, in Poland, around the world, in America, in Tennessee, are looking for where are they going to get the bits and pieces. They'll do the GE Hitachi, but who are they turning to? They're turning to Canada and the supply chain, the makers, the big supply chains in Ontario. Funny as it is, we have an agreement, a treaty with Canada. So we have the political architecture already to get involved with Canada. This was struck in 1981, but in 1995, looking through the records on the DFAT website, there was lots of exchanges of notes confirming that we were complying with the deals of the treaty, that we've got signed up to non-proliferation and all those other bits and pieces that the Canadians want us to sign up to. So that is in force. It doesn't have to be ratified, it's already ratified. So we're ready to go. So I'm suggesting we do what Canada has done, and we get going on a roadmap. And that would involve getting our regulators located over there. Now, I'm not in government now, but if we had, in that hypothetical utopia called coalition government, again, John, that was my secret plan. It wasn't publicly announced, but I was hoping that I'd be organising this. But now the other mob are in charge, so we've just got to promote the idea that we need to repeal the bans. Now, their SMR roadmap's been going for 4 years. The regulator over there is very open. The hearings are held in public. It's not behind closed doors. So why have it behind closed doors? Then everyone says there's conspiracy theories. So everything's open. They have the whole EPPC equivalent, depending on if it's a new or an existing or a really big plant. There's slightly different levels. But all the same process that we do, they do. But they seem to get through it. So OPG, as I said, this is a government organisation. They've been involved in generating for 100 years. But that's all their sites in. The sites in North America are almost more numerous than in Ontario. But the can-do reactors is their stable stock standard reactor. It will have a 80-year lifespan once they finish this 30-year added service from the refurbishment. And it's really quite impressive. But the main thing is in Ontario, they're almost as good as France. 60% of their energy is nuclear, but they've got all these hydro plants all over the place, so they are very decarbonised. They did have coal plants. There's still coal plants in other states, but Saskatchewan, New Brunswick, moving out of coal and into nuclear. They have the stock standard workhorse they're going to go with is the BWX 300 that Rob will tell you all about, but they're also involved in this small advanced level 4 reactor is for generation of industrial heat. And then they've got the micro modular reactor at Chalk River, which is, according to my friends, held up a bit. They haven't translated the work as quickly as they thought possible. They need somebody like GE or an existing entity to get involved and make the research turn into reality a lot quicker. But that's where they're going. And these slides, I didn't make these slides up. They were pitching to us. They are looking for partners because they want their supply chain to be utilised. And they were very encouraging to us. And they were aware of our bans, but they're open for business. And just to show you, it's not just GE Hitachi doing the rounds of Europe. Todd Smith is rapidly signing up deals to get Ontario as the technology provider. Here he is with the signing with the Czech Republic. Here he is at the signing at a government level with Poland, who are doing 10 BWX 300s. This is with him in Estonia, exploring, but I suspect at the next conference coming up in Europe, they'll probably sign a deal. And, hello, Sweden, who's already signed up with BWX 300 and GE Hitachi. There's 2 lots. I mean, there's NuScale going in Romania, and also NuScale is got a foot in the water in Czechoslovakia because they're really ramping up their nuclear. So look, the SMRs, it's not a renaissance, it's more like a stampede. Everyone's worked out nuclear's the go. But like our dilemma when everyone worked out that, hey, rad tests are actually pretty useful bits of kit, let's go and get some rad tests. Everyone said, well, look, we'll send you some in a couple of months. Everyone wants rad tests. And that's what's happening in nuclear. Our energy crisis, I just spent 3 weeks in South Africa due to corruption, maladministration, faulty policies where they got rid of skilled people and put untrained people, whether it's in a hotel kitchen or in a power station. South Africa now has ultimate demand management. Some cities don't have energy some days. Some cities have energies only part of the day, but it's regular. And they have been seduced by the idea that if they build renewables, they're quick, cheap and easy and they'll solve the problem. Hello, it's not going to work. It's not working for us. But we need to, as Dave mentioned, we need to embrace nuclear so that we can have a viable transition. It's no good transitioning to a mirage. We've got to have something to replace that 24/7 power. It's going to be a lot easier to build a nuclear power plant and finance it than, the collective guardians of the universe, the bankers and financiers who are captured by ESG, are starving our coal operators and our coal power stations already with ongoing finance. It's a real dilemma, and maybe that's some of the reason they're bringing forward the closures. So we've also got energy, but this is all the political stuff. This is just pure DG. This is not what we learnt in Canada, but the parallels are the same. We need to obviously remove the barriers so that people can get into the serious planning and negotiating. You can't just do something that's illegal, and we can't send our regulators or get our young engineers over there if it's still illegal for anyone to approve one. So it'd be great. Now, the other thing is that I've noticed in my travels through this wonderful industry that's empowered the emancipation of everyone from hard physical labour, and that is the wonders of engineering. There's not many engineers when you look at all these regulators. They're all governance experts and they're really qualified board members, so they get the high level stuff. But when you read as Dave, who's a trained engineer, was saying, the AEMO thing, it bamboozles people. Unless you're a deeply experienced engineer and have it all explained to you, if you're just, you've been on a board here and a board here, and it looks pretty good, it's 150 pages, it must be work, what they're all saying, like it's easy to bamboozle people. So it's my desire, back in the day, when New South Wales Energy Commission had the biggest and brightest engineers, they actually also ran the system and they knew how it all worked. And one of the other things, one of my constituents used to be the chief engineer for BHP. He also wrote the original 700 pages for NEMCO before it became AEMO. He said a lot of the skills in power engineering have all been lost in the young engineers. They don't know about harmonic circuits and interference and all the asynchronicity of all these things. You're all nodding your heads, you all know it, but hey, that seems to be lost in translation. They've got all these digital workarounds, but it's incredibly light and could just go kaput so easily. If we had an East Coast low, or if we had an unplanned outage, or another company went broke and they brought forward their closure, it's just a disaster waiting to happen. We've also still got to keep coal, gas and oil and renewables. They're still all needed. Nuclear won't wave a magic wand and you won't need anything else. You're still going to need a multiplicity of energy supplies. So I think our roadmap will start in an unplanned, chaotic fashion, or not chaotic, but it'll be with a lot of urgent pressure all of a sudden after the blackouts begin, when Liddell closes 3 plants in April. But I wish that wasn't the case. And I'll hand over to our engineers to talk about the nuts and bolts of everything. Thanks.